In this lesson, we're going to learn how to paint textures onto our terrain. Alright, so inside of Unity, we want to go ahead and select the terrain itself, and then we'll want to go over to the inspector and select our paint tool. Now with the paint tool selected, we need to define some terrain textures. As you can see, it tells us that there are no textures defined. To define those, we'll simply hit Edit Textures and then Add Texture. It will give us this Add Terrain Texture dialog box, and it's pretty simple. All we need to do is add an albedo texture as well as a normal map. So let's select our albedo that we want to use, and in this case I'm going to lay down my base texture, and I'm going to use this sand albedo. Left click on that, and if you double click on it, it's automatically going to assign it to that slot. Then we need to select our normal map. Go ahead and select that, and then you're going to go down to the bottom, and we're going to use the sand normal. Now that that has been assigned, there's one thing that you need to be aware of whenever you are assigning your normal maps. If you have not used that normal map before, you'll need to fix it to where the texture type is set to normal map. So to do that, just left click on the normal map itself here in the Add Terrain Texture. That will find it in your project browser. Select the texture in the project browser, and then go over to your inspector. Set your texture type to normal map, and then turn off Create from Grayscale, and then hit Apply. If you don't do that, you're going to have this weird shading on your normal map and on your terrain itself. Okay. Now once we've fixed all of that, all we have to do at this point is simply hit Add. Go ahead and add that to your terrain, and you'll see that we get this nice sand texture. If you're not happy with the tiling of that texture, what you can do is go back to your terrain, make sure you select it, and then select the texture in your texture section and hit Edit Textures. Then you want to hit Edit Texture. So that will allow you to come back and edit any properties about this texture for your terrain. So if you want to adjust the tiling, let's say that you want more tiling, you'll need a lower number. So watch this. If we go to 1 on both of these, you'll notice that it tiles very, very small. So let's set it to about 10. And you'll see that we get a nice look on our sand texture. I may actually go a little bit higher on that. Let's try 20 on both of these. And you'll see that we get this coarse sand. And we kind of want to think about what it's going to look like from the angle of our camera. And so we're going to have a camera that's kind of high above the scene itself. And just kind of, let me zoom in a little bit more. Actually, let's hit F really quickly. There we go. So we kind of want to think about what the camera is going to look like. So we're going to have this kind of isometric view, and our character is going to be running through the pathways here. And so we'll get to right about here, and that looks pretty good. We may want to adjust that a little bit more. I think 15 was probably the best that we had there. Yeah, I think that'll be okay. Now this sand texture by itself, it's probably not the greatest. Maybe we want to mix some textures together, and you can do that with terrains. This can be done by editing your textures again, and instead of editing the texture, you just simply add a new texture. So now we have the dialog box again. Let's add another texture. Let's go ahead and add in this rocky ground, and we'll also use its normal map. And again, you'll want to switch the type of that normal map. I've already done that just to save some time, and then you'll just simply hit Add. So now if you select that texture in your textures palette, you can come in and you can select a brush, and you can start painting in this texture. So I'm going to make it a pretty large brush, and then the opacity I'm going to make pretty small. And I'm just going to left click and hold and start to kind of paint in this rocky ground. Okay, and I'm just going to sporadically put this around these high points of my map, because on these high points I'm actually going to put some assets, so rocks and things like that. And we'll start to kind of break up this monotonous sand texture. So it might be a good idea to kind of look at some arid desert reference images, as that's kind of what I'm going for. And you can kind of see some of these different textures in there, and you'll want to paint that in. Now you can spend as much time as you want on this painting it. It doesn't really matter at this point. We'll start to make more design decisions at a later point in game development. You'll start to kind of break it out, kind of see what it looks like, and then you'll make adjustments as you go along. But you'll see how this is allowing us to paint these two textures and is allowing us to mix it, creating a more dynamic looking level. Okay, now we'll really start to set this off whenever we start adding in our assets, and we can make some changes to the overall design, the textures and things like that. The terrain tools are very flexible here inside of Unity, and so you can really get a lot of work done very quickly. Alright, so once we've painted out what we want on our texture, what we can do at this point is we can start to modify some of the textures if we need to. And I want to show you how to do this very quickly and just show you how fast you can iterate on your levels. So let's say, for example, you want to use maybe this red dirt texture. Let's go ahead and add that to our terrain really quickly. So I'm going to add this red dirt, and it has a normal map as well. And this red dirt already has the normal map fixed. So I'm going to add that, and I want to start painting this into some of my areas. And so I'm going to make my brush size a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to come in and I'm going to start to kind of paint these pathways, make those a little bit more red. Okay, but let's say that as I'm painting this in, I feel like that's just a little too red. Maybe I want to lighten that up a little bit. This can be done very quickly if I find the texture inside of my project browser and I double click on it. What that will do is it will bring it up inside of your default program that you have set for the file type. So the file type for this texture is TGA, a Targa file. I have that set to open up inside of Photoshop by default. And so whenever I double click on that, that's going to bring up Photoshop here. Now as you can see, I have my red dirt texture here. And what I can do at this point is I can add an adjustment layer. Remember, you want to stay as non-destructive as possible, but you can add an adjustment layer to this and you can start to modify the look of this. So let's say that I want to make this a little bit lighter in color, maybe a little bit more yellow. Okay, so I can make a little bit of an adjustment there, maybe desaturate it just a little, and maybe even lighten it. Okay, not a lot, just a little bit. So once I've made my adjustments, I can go to File and Save As. It would be a good idea to go ahead and save it as a PSD file, so that way you can come back to it very quickly, but you don't have to as long as you keep it open here. But I would recommend saving it as a PSD. And then what I'll do is I'll come in and I'll save it as a Targa file, and I'm just going to resave it into the Unity Files folder. So this is in my Textures folder, and this is inside of Unity Files, inside of my project. Let me hit Save, and then I'm going to go ahead and replace it. And then let's go back into Unity, and you'll see that that update has been made. And so now this is a little bit more in the color palette range that I was looking for. And so now I can come in and I can just start to kind of brush that in, making my pathways a little bit more distinct overall. Okay, and this is a great way to lead the player into your level, just to kind of let them know that they are on the correct path. Paths should always have a little bit of a different color than the rest of the environment. Okay, it's something that the player expects, and it kind of brings about a comfort to the player. Okay, this is one of those mind tricks, I guess you could say. You know, game designers and level designers are all about manipulation, and I know that that sounds kind of bad, but it's really not. We want the player to go in certain areas. We want them to feel a certain way. And so this is one of those tricks that level designers use to lead the player in a certain direction. They see a different color, or they see a lighter area, and the brain just automatically gravitates toward areas like that. And so pathways, if you see them in games, are usually much different than the rest of the environment. And so now we have something that looks like this. That feels a little bit more comfortable. And so as the player's going along, they're going to see this pathway and they're going to feel much better. All right, so now that we've painted our terrain, let's go ahead and start adding some assets to our scene and really start to set dress our level. And we'll get started with that next.